into a small room with no windows. The floor was dirt, and the walls were covered with stains that Marcus did not want to think about. 5 other men were pushed into the room with him, and then the door slammed shut. For a long time, nobody spoke. Marcus sat in the corner and tried to slow his breathing. Had been in dangerous situations before in his 20s. He had worked as a volunteer aid worker in places where bombs fell from the sky and soldiers shot at anything that moved. He had learned that panic was the enemy of survival. The man who stays calm is the man who finds a way out. Over the next few days, Marcus began to understand how the compound worked. The pirates were organized like a small army with a leader named Gould, who made all the important decisions. Gould was a thin man with cold eyes and a voice that never rose above a whisper. Everyone was afraid of him, including his own men. Guards brought food twice a day. A small cup of rice and sometimes a piece of bread. Water came from a plastic jug that was refilled every morning. It was not enough, but it was enough to stay alive. Marcus watched everything and remembered everything. He noticed that the guards changed shifts at sunrise and sunset. He learned their names by listening to their conversations. There was Abdi, a young man who could not have been older than 20, who always looked sad when he brought the food. There was Yusuf, a teenager with bright eyes, who seemed more curious than cruel. And there were others, harder men who kicked the hostages for fun and laughed when they cried. The other hostages reacted in different ways. One man, a Filipino sailor named Raymond, wept every night and called out for his wife and children. Another man, an older engineer from India named Prakash, stopped eating after the first week and had to be forced to swallow his rice. A young deckhand from Indonesia spent his days praying in the corner, whispering words that Marcus could not hear. Marcus understood their pain, but he knew that falling apart would not help anyone. Instead, he focused on small things. He counted the number of steps from their cell to the main gate. He memorized the faces of every guard. He studied the locks on the doors and the height of the walls. He did not know if any of this information would ever be useful, but gathering it gave him something to do, something to keep his mind sharp. Weeks passed, and the pirates began negotiations with the shipping company that owned the vessel. Marcus learned this from the guards, who sometimes talked too loudly outside the cell door. The pirates wanted $2 million for the 12 hostages. The company offered 200,000 gold. Was furious one night. He came to the cell and pulled Raymond out by his hair. Marcus heard screaming from somewhere in the compound, and when Raymond was thrown back into the cell the next morning, his face was covered in bruises, and one of his fingers was bent at a terrible angle. The message was clear: pay the money or worse things would happen. But the company did not pay. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into a month. The hostages grew thinner and weaker. Prakash stopped speaking entirely and just stared at the wall with empty eyes. The Indonesian deckhand got sick with a fever that made him shake and sweat. Marcus did what he could to help, sharing his water and his food, but there was only so much anyone could do. In the evening, Abdi came to bring the food, and Marcus saw something in the young man's face that surprised him. It was not cruelty or anger. It was exhaustion. Abdi looked like someone who had not slept in days, like someone carrying a weight too heavy for his shoulders. Marcus took a risk. He said, "Thank you," in Somali, one of the few phrases he had learned by listening to the guards. Abdi stopped and stared at him for a moment. They just looked at each other. The prisoner and the guard, 2 men trapped in a situation neither of them had chosen. Then Abdi nodded once and left without saying a word. That small moment changed something. Over the following days, Abdi began to treat Marcus differently. He would linger a little longer when bringing food. He would make sure Marcus got a full cup of rice instead of a half cup. Once he brought a small piece of fruit, something sweet and yellow that Marcus ate slowly, savoring every bite. Marcus did not know why Abdi was being kind, but he understood that kindness was a door. If he could open that door just a little wider, he might find something on the other side. Something That could save him and maybe save everyone else too. The second month of captivity began with a storm that shook the compound and flooded the cells with muddy water. The hostages huddled together in the corner, trying to stay dry while thunder roared. Outside, Marcus looked at the men around him, at their hollow cheeks and their frightened eyes, and he made a silent promise he would find a way out of this place. Not by fighting and not by running, but by doing what he had always done, by fixing what was broken. The generator died on a Tuesday night, and everything in the compound went dark. Marcus heard the pirates shouting and cursing as they stumbled around in the blackness. Without power, they had no lights, no way to charge their phones, and most importantly, no way to contact the people they were negotiating with. For the pirates, this was a disaster. For Marcus, it was an opportunity. He had been listening to that generator for weeks, paying attention to the sounds it made, the way it coughed and sputtered before starting each morning. He knew from the noises that something was wrong with the fuel system. Probably a clogged filter or broken pump. It was the kind of problem he had fixed 100 times on the oil rigs. The next morning, Abdi came to the cell, looking more stressed than usual. Marcus asked him what was wrong, and Abdi surprised him by actually answering. He explained that the generator had stopped working, and nobody knew how to fix it. The pirates had tried everything, but the machine would not start without it. They could not make calls, and without calls, they could not get there. Money Marcus saw his chance, and told Abdi that he was an engineer, and that he had worked on generators his whole life. He said he could probably fix it if they let him try. Abdi stared at him with suspicion in his eyes. Why would a prisoner want to help his captors? Marcus told him the truth. He said that if the generator stayed broken, the pirates would get angry, and when pirates got angry, they hurt their hostages. Fixing the generator was not about helping, the pirates said. It was about keeping everyone alive. Abdi thought about this for a long time, and then he left without saying anything. Marcus waited in the cell, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake. Maybe they would think he was trying to trick them. Maybe they would punish him for speaking out of turn. But a few hours later, the cell door opened and 2 guards came in with chains. They wrapped the chains around his wrists and ankles and dragged him across the compound to a small shed where the generator sat silent and dead-keeled, was there waiting for him. The pirate leader looked at Marcus with those cold, empty eyes and said nothing. He just pointed at the generator and stepped back. Marcus got to work. Even with chains on his hands, he was able to open the machine and look inside. The problem was exactly what he had expected. A fuel filter so clogged with dirt that almost nothing could get through. He cleaned it carefully using a piece of cloth that one of the guards gave him. Then he checked the fuel lines and found a small crack that was letting air into the system. Asked for tape, and they brought him some. He wrapped the crack tight and sealed it as best he could. When he was finished, he stood back and told them to try starting it. One of the pirates pulled the cord, and the generator coughed once, twice, and then roared to life. The lights in the compound flickered on. The men began to cheer. Even Gould allowed himself a small smile. Marcus was taken back to his cell, but something had changed. The guards looked at him differently. Now they whispered to each other. When he walked past, the foreign engineer had magic hands. They said he could bring dead machines back to life. A week later, the water pump broke down, and the pirates came for Marcus again. This time they did not put chains on his wrists. They just asked him politely to come and look at the problem. Marcus fixed the pump in less than an hour. The next week it was one of the trucks, an old Toyota with an engine that refused to start. Marcus spent an entire day working on it, but by sunset, the truck was running better than it had in years. Each time he fixed something, he asked for nothing in return. He did not demand better food or a softer place to sleep. He did not try to bargain for his freedom. He just did the work and went back to his cell. This confused the pirates. They were used to people who begged and pleaded and made deals. They did not know what to do with a man who helped them for free. Abdi started bringing Marcus tea in the evenings. It was a small kindness, but it meant everything. The tea was hot and sweet, and it reminded Marcus that there was still goodness in the world, even in a place like this. One night, Abdi stayed to talk. He told Marcus about his life, about how he had grown up in a small village near the coast where his father was a fisherman. When Abdi was 15 years old, some men came to the village with guns. They took Abdi and 3 other boys and brought them to a pirate camp. They told the boys that they would work for the pirates now, and if they tried to run away, their families would be killed. Abdi had been a pirate for 5 years, but he had never wanted this life. He sent every dollar he earned back to his mother and his sisters. In Mogadishu, he dreamed of saving enough money to buy his freedom and start a new life somewhere far away. Marcus listened without judging. He understood that the world was more complicated than good people and bad people. Sometimes people did terrible things because they had no other choice. Sometimes the line between victim and villain was so thin you could not even see it. Another guard named Yusuf began to spend time with Marcus. Yusuf was only 17 years old, barely more than a child. He had bright, curious eyes and a quick smile that seemed out of place in such a dark world. Yusuf wanted to know how Marcus had learned to fix machines. He asked 1,000 questions about engines and pumps and generators. Marcus answered every question as best he could. He drew diagrams in the dirt with a stick. He explained how fuel became energy and how energy became motion. Yusuf listened with the hunger of someone who had never been taught anything except how to hold a gun. The other hostages noticed the change. Raymond stopped crying at night because the guards had stopped beating him. Prakash started eating again because the food had improved. The Indonesian deckhand recovered from his fever after Marcus convinced Abdi to bring medicine from the compound supply room. It was not freedom, but it was something. It was survival. By the 3rd month, Marcus had become an important person in the compound. The pirates needed him to keep their equipment running. They could not afford to hurt him or let him get sick. This gave him a kind of power that no other hostage had ever had. But Marcus did not use his power to demand things for himself. He used it to make life better for everyone. He asked for extra blankets when the nights got cold. He requested that the hostages be allowed to walk outside for a few minutes each day. He convinced Gul to let the prisoners have clean water to wash themselves. Small victories, but they mattered. One evening, as Marcus was fixing a broken radio, he had a thought that changed everything. He realized that the pirates were not so different from the machines he worked on. They were broken in their own ways, damaged by war and poverty and violence. They needed someone to show them that there was another way to live. They needed someone to fix them. It was a crazy idea, and Marcus knew it might get him killed, but he also knew that he could not stay in this cell forever waiting for a rescue that might never come. If he wanted to survive, he would have to do something that no hostage had ever done before. He would have to become more than a prisoner. He would have to become a teacher. 6 months had passed since the pirates took Marcus and the other hostages from their ship. The negotiations with the shipping company had completely fallen apart. The company refused to pay more than $500,000, and Gould was demanding $2 million. Neither side would move, and the hostages were caught in the middle. The tension in the compound grew worse every day. The pirates were running out of money and patience. They had spent a fortune feeding and guarding their prisoners, and now it looked like they might never get paid. Some of the younger pirates wanted to kill a hostage to send a message. Others wanted to sell the prisoners to a different group, maybe terrorists who would pay for foreigners. Gold kept everyone under control, but Marcus could see that his power was slipping. One night, a fight broke out between 2 pirates over a small amount of money. One man pulled a knife and the other pulled a gun. Before anyone could stop them, there was a loud bang, and one of the pirates fell to the ground with a hole in his chest. Died within minutes. The compound erupted into chaos. Men were shouting and pointing fingers and threatening to kill each other. Guild had to beat 3 of his own men unconscious just to restore order that night. Marcus lay awake in his cell, listening to the sounds of anger and fear outside. He knew that time was running out. If something did not change soon, the pirates would start killing hostages just to feel like they were doing something. He had to act now. The next morning, Marcus asked to speak with Guild. The guards laughed at him, but Marcus kept asking. Finally, Abdi agreed to pass the message along to everyone's surprise. Gould agreed to the meeting. They brought Marcus to a small room in the main building where Guild sat behind a wooden desk. The pirate leader looked tired and old. His eyes were red and his hands shook slightly as he lit a cigarette. Marcus stood before him in chains and spoke carefully. He told Gould that he understood the situation. The money was not coming, and the men were getting restless soon. There would be more fighting and more death, and in the end, everyone would lose. But Marcus said there was another way. He proposed a deal. He would teach the younger pirates real skills: mechanical repair, engine maintenance, basic engineering. He would turn them into men who could find honest work when this was all over. In exchange, Guild would treat the hostages humanely. No more beatings, no more threats, no more starvation, just patience while they waited for the money. Guild stared at Marcus for a very long time. The room was silent except for the sound of the wind outside. Finally, the pirate leader spoke. He asked Marcus why he would help the men who had taken his freedom. What did he have to gain from teaching pirates? Marcus told him the truth, said that he wanted to survive and he wanted the other hostages to survive. But he also said something else, something that surprised even himself. He said that he had watched the young men in this compound and he had seen something in their eyes. He had seen hunger, not for food, but for knowledge. He had seen boys who had never been given a chance to be anything except soldiers and criminals. He believed that if someone showed them a different path, some of them might take it. Guild laughed, a cold, empty sound that echoed off the walls. He called Marcus a fool and a dreamer, but then he stopped laughing and looked at Marcus with something that might have been respect. He said that foolish dreams were sometimes the only things worth believing. And he agreed to the deal. Within a week, Marcus had set up a small workshop in one of the empty buildings. Abdi and Yusuf were his first students, but others soon joined them. There was Hassan, a quiet young man with steady hands who learned to weld in just a few days. There was Omar, a former fisherman who discovered he had a gift for understanding engines. There was even a boy named Farhan who was only 15 years old and who had never held a tool in his life before Marcus gave him a wrench. Marcus taught them everything he knew. He showed them how to take apart a generator and put it back together. He explained the principles of combustion and compression. He drew diagrams and made models out of scrap metal and wire. The pirates listened with fascination. Most of them had never been to school. Most of them could barely read or write, but they understood machines, because machines made sense in a way that the world did not. The other hostages watched this strange transformation with a mixture of hope and confusion. Raymond could not believe that Marcus was helping the enemy. He accused Marcus of being a traitor, of caring more about the pirates than about his fellow prisoners. Marcus did not argue with him. He just pointed out that the beatings had stopped. The food had improved. The guards no longer treated them like animals. Whatever Marcus was doing, it was working. Prakash, the older engineer from India, was the first to understand what Marcus was really trying to do. He pulled Marcus aside and told him that he had seen this before in the partition of India. In the wars that followed, people had found ways to build bridges across impossible divides. It did not always work, but sometimes, just sometimes, it saved lives. Prakash asked if he could help with the teaching. He had been an electrical engineer for 40 years, and he knew things that Marcus did not. Marcus agreed immediately. Soon, they had 2 teachers instead of 1, and the classes grew larger. Even some of the older pirates started to show interest. They would stand at the edge of the workshop, pretending not to watch, while Marcus explained how to repair a fuel pump or replace a broken belt. The compound began to change in ways that nobody had expected. The young pirates walked taller now. They had something to be proud of, something that did not involve hurting people. They started calling Marcus teacher instead of prisoner, and they said it with respect. Yusuf became Marcus's best student. The teenager had a natural gift for understanding how things worked. He could look at a broken machine and somehow see what was wrong with it before anyone else. Marcus told him that he could have a real future if he ever got out of this life. He could go to a city and find work as a mechanic. He could build something instead of destroying things. Yusuf smiled when Marcus said this, but his eyes were sad. He explained that it was not so easy. The pirates did not let people leave once you were in. You were in for life. Anyone who tried to escape was hunted down and killed. It was a prison without walls. Marcus understood then that the young pirates were hostages too. They were trapped just like him, caught in a web of violence and fear that had been woven long before they were born. The only difference was that they held the guns, but guns did not make them free. As the weeks passed, Marcus found himself caring about these young men in a way he had not expected. He worried about them when they got sick. He celebrated when they learned something new. He scolded them when they made mistakes and praised them when they did well. He knew it was strange to feel this way about his captors, but he could not help it. They were human beings, broken and lost and searching for something better. And somehow in this dark and terrible place, Marcus had become their guide. 9 months had passed since the capture, and the compound had become something nobody could have predicted. The hostages were still prisoners, but they were treated almost like guests. Now they had better food, clean water, and time to walk outside. Every day some of the younger pirates even played cards with them in the evenings. Marcus had created something impossible. A small pocket of humanity in the middle of a pirate stronghold. The workshop had grown into a real school. 23 young pirates had completed the basic training program, and some of them were now teaching others what they had learned. Yusuf had become so skilled that he could fix almost anything. Generators, trucks, pumps, radios. Abdi had discovered a talent for organizing and planning that made him invaluable. Even Hassan, who had been one of the cruelest guards in the beginning, had softened into something like a decent human being. Gould watched all of this with a complicated expression on his face. Marcus could never tell if the pirate leader approved of what was happening or if he was just waiting for the right moment to end it all. The negotiation with the shipping company had restarted after Gould lowered his demands. There was talk that a deal might finally be possible. Everyone was waiting for news then. One morning, just before sunrise, the world exploded. Marcus was sleeping in his cell when he heard the first gunshots. They were loud and close. Not the usual sounds of arguments, but the sharp crack of military weapons. He jumped to his feet and pressed himself against the wall as more shots echoed through the compound. Shouting, screaming, the roar of engines. Through the small window in the door he could see men running in every direction. Some of them were pirates, but others wore uniforms he did not recognize. The compound was being raided. Marcus later learned that it was a joint operation between Puntland security forces and an international naval coalition. They had been tracking the pirate compound for months, gathering intelligence and waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment had come. The battle lasted less than an hour, but it felt like forever. Marcus and the other hostages stayed flat on the floor of their cell while bullets punched holes in the walls above them. The noise was deafening. Guns and grenades and the terrible sounds of men dying. Marcus thought about all the young pirates he had taught, about Yusuf and Abdi and Hassan. He wondered how many of them would survive this day. When the shooting finally stopped, a soldier kicked open the cell door and shouted at them to come out with their hands up. Marcus crawled into the sunlight and saw the compound transformed into a battlefield. Bodies lay everywhere. Trucks were burning. The workshop where he had taught his students was riddled with bullet holes. The soldiers separated the hostages from the pirates and began checking everyone for weapons. Marcus stood in the middle of the chaos, looking around for familiar faces. He saw Gould being dragged away in handcuffs, blood running down the side of his face. He saw some of the older pirates lying motionless on the ground, but he could not find Yusuf or Abdi anywhere. Then he heard a voice calling his name. It was Abdi. The young man was hiding behind a concrete wall near the main building, holding his arm where a bullet had grazed him. Soldiers were moving toward his position, and they did not look like they were planning to take prisoners. Marcus did not think. He just ran. He sprinted across the open ground faster than he had ever run. In his life, bullets kicked up dust around his feet, but he did not stop. He reached Abdi just as the soldiers raised their weapons. Marcus threw himself over the young man, covering Abdi's body with his own. He screamed at the soldiers to stop, telling them that this man was not a threat, that he had surrendered. The soldiers hesitated. They had been told that everyone in this compound was a dangerous criminal, a pirate who deserved no mercy, but here was one of the hostages, one of the people they had come to rescue, shielding a pirate with his own body. An officer arrived and demanded to know what was happening. Marcus stood up slowly with his hands raised and explained. He told them about the workshop, about the young men who had been forced into piracy as children, about the deal he had made with Goldie. Said that Abdi was not evil, just desperate. He asked them to show mercy. The officer stared at Marcus for a long moment. Then he ordered his men to take Abdi into custody instead of shooting him on the spot. It was not freedom, but it was life. The rescue was complete by midday. All 12 hostages had survived, including the ones who had been taken months before. Marcus, the soldiers loaded them onto helicopters and flew them to a military base where doctors were waiting. Marcus was examined and treated for malnutrition and minor injuries, answered questions from intelligence officers who wanted to know everything about the compound. He told them the truth. All of it. Told them about the brutality of the early days and the strange transformation that followed. He told them about his students and his deal with Gould and his hope that some of the young pirates might find a different path. The officers did not know what to make of his story. They had seen many hostage situations, but never anything like this. One of them called Marcus a hero. Another called him a fool. Marcus thought both descriptions were probably true. In the days that followed, journalists arrived and the story began to spread. A mechanical engineer from Montana had been captured by Somali pirates, and instead of breaking, he had built a school. He had taught his captors skills that could change their lives. He had turned enemies into something like friends. The headlines were dramatic, and the world paid attention. Marcus gave one interview to a major news network, spoke quietly and simply about what had happened. He did not try to make himself sound brave or special. He just told the truth when the interviewer asked why he had risked his life to save Abdi, a man who had helped keep him prisoner for 9 months. Marcus thought for a long time before answering. He said that Abdi was not his enemy. Abdi was a young man who had been given no choices in life. He had been stolen from his family as a child and forced to become something he never wanted to be. Saving Abdi was not about forgiveness or heroism. It was about recognizing that every person deserves a chance to become something better. The interview was watched by millions of people around the world. Some called Marcus a saint, others called him naive and dangerous. Politicians argued about what his story meant for the fight against piracy. Academics wrote papers analyzing his methods. Marcus did not care about any of it, just wanted to know what had happened to his students. The news came slowly over the following weeks. Gould was in prison awaiting trial for piracy, kidnapping, and murder. He would probably spend the rest of his life behind bars. 3 pirates had been killed in the raid, including Omar, the former fisherman who had been so good with engines. Marcus wept when he heard this. 7 pirates had been captured, including Abdi and Hassan. They would face charges, but their sentences might be reduced if they cooperated with authorities. Yusuf had escaped during the chaos of the raid. Nobody knew where he was. Marcus hoped the young man was safe somewhere, using the skills he had learned to build a new life, but there was no way to know for sure. The other hostages returned to their homes and families. Raymond went back to the Philippines where his wife and children were waiting. Prakash retired to a small village in India where he could garden and read books in peace. Indonesian deckhand became a spokesman for hostage rights and traveled the world telling his story. Each of them carried the memory of those 9 months in different ways. Some had nightmares, some had gratitude. All of them remembered the quiet engineer from Montana who had changed everything. Marcus flew back to the United States, where he was greeted at the airport by reporters and cameras and family members he had not seen in almost a year. His mother hugged him and cried. His brother shook his hand and did not let go. For a little while, Marcus was famous. He appeared on television shows and gave speeches at universities. Publishers offered him money to write a book about his experience. Movie producers wanted to tell his story on the big screen. Marcus said no to all of it. Did not want to be famous. He did not want to be a symbol or a lesson. Just wanted to be left alone so he could figure out what his life meant. Now, a month after his rescue, Marcus packed a bag and disappeared. He did not tell anyone where he was going. He just left. 3 years passed, and the world forgot about Marcus Chunnu. Stories filled the headlines, and new heroes replaced the old ones. The pirate who became a teacher was just a memory now. A strange tale that people sometimes mentioned at dinner parties. But for some people, the story never ended. Abdi stood in court on a hot day in September and told the judge everything. He described how he had been kidnapped as a child and forced to become a pirate. He named the men who had recruited him and the crimes they had committed. He provided information that helped authorities shut down 3 other pirate operations along the coasting. In exchange for his cooperation, Abdi received a reduced sentence of 4 years instead of 20. He served his time in a prison near Mogadishu, where he worked in the maintenance department fixing generators and trucks and anything else that broke. The guards said he was the best mechanic they had ever seen. When Abdi was released, he had nothing except the clothes on his back and the skills in his hands. He walked out of the prison gate and found a small envelope waiting for him. Inside was a letter and some money, enough to rent a small shop and buy basic tools. The letter was unsigned, but Abdi knew who had sent it. Recognized the handwriting from the diagrams Marcus used to draw in the workshop. The letter said only 3 words: build something good. Abdi took a bus to the outskirts of Mogadishu, where he found a cheap space to rent. It was nothing more than a concrete room with a metal roof, but it was his. He painted a sign and hung it above the door. Chen Mechanics. The first customer came on the 3rd day. A taxi driver with a broken alternator. Abdi fixed it in 2 hours and charged half what the other mechanics in the city would have asked. The taxi driver told his friends, and his friends told their friends. Within a month, Abdi had more work than he could handle alone. He needed help, and he knew exactly where to find it. Hassan had been released from prison a few months earlier and was struggling to survive. He had tried to find honest work, but nobody wanted to hire a former pirate when Abdi offered him a job. Hassan wept with gratitude. He became the 2nd employee of Chen Mechanics. Then, one afternoon, a young man walked into the shop and asked if they needed another worker. He was thin and tired, and his clothes were worn, but his eyes were bright and curious. It was Yusuf. He had spent the years since the raid moving from place to place, working odd jobs and staying out of trouble. He had heard about the shop through the network of former pirates who still kept in touch with each other. He had walked for 3 days to get here. Abdi hired him on the spot. The 3 of them worked together. The way Marcus had taught them, they shared knowledge and helped each other learn. When one of them made a mistake, The others showed him how to fix it without anger or shame. They were building something new. Not just a business, but a family. Word spread about the shop in Mogadishu that hired former child soldiers. Journalists came to write stories about it. Aid organizations offered support and funding. Young men who had escaped from pirate gangs started showing up looking for work. Abdi and Yusuf and Hassan hired as many as they could. Within 2 years, Chem Mechanics had 14 employees. All of them were former pirates or child soldiers. All of them had been given up on by the rest of the world. Shop became famous in Somalia as a place where broken people could find a second chance. Other businesses started copying the model, hiring former fighters and training them for honest work. The government took notice and created a program to support similar efforts across the country. Something that had started in a pirate compound with a prisoner teaching his captors had grown into a movement. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, Marcus Chen had built a quiet life for himself. After leaving the United States, he had traveled to Myanmar, where he found work on an engineering project in a remote village. The project was building water systems for communities that had never had clean drinking water before. It was hard work in difficult conditions, but Marcus loved it. Lived in a small hut with a tin roof and spent his days digging wells and installing pumps. He did not give interviews or appear on television. He did not write a book or make a movie. He just worked. Sometimes at night, he would think about Abdi and Yusuf and the other young men he had taught. He wondered what had happened to them and whether any of them had found a better path. He hoped they had, but he did not know for certain then. One day a journalist found him. She was writing a story about the water project, and someone mentioned that one of the engineers had an interesting past. She did some research and discovered the truth. The quiet American digging wells in Myanmar was the same man who had taught pirates in Somalia. She asked if she could interview him, and Marcus said no. She asked if he knew what had happened to his former students, and Marcus said he did not. She told him about Chem Mechanics. She told him about Abdi and Yusuf and Hassan. She told him about the 14 employees and the movement they had inspired. She showed him pictures on her phone, photographs of the shop with its hand-painted sign and the young men standing proudly in front of it. Marcus looked at the pictures for a long time without speaking. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. He said that he had hoped for this, but he had never truly believed it would happen. He said that when he was teaching those young men in the compound, he did not know if he was making any difference at all. He said that some nights he had thought he was just fooling himself, that nothing he did would change anything. But here was the proof that he had been wrong. The journalist asked Marcus the question that everyone had always wanted to know: why had he helped the people who had taken his freedom? Why had he risked everything to teach skills to his captors? Why had he thrown himself in front of bullets to save a pirate? Marcus thought about the question for a while. He thought about Abdi bringing him tea in the darkness. He thought about Yusuf's bright, curious eyes. He thought about the young men who had been given no choices in life until someone finally showed them there was another way. Then he gave her his answer. He said that they took him prisoner because they saw no other way to survive. He said that he became their teacher because he saw no other way to stay human. He said that in the end, they saved each other. Journalists wrote her story, and it was published in newspapers around the world. People read about Marcus Chun and the shop in Mogadishu and the movement it had started. Some people cried. Some people donated money to support the work. Some people were inspired to start similar projects in their own communities. But Marcus did not pay attention to any of that. He just went back to work, digging wells and installing pumps and bringing clean water to people who needed it. He was not a hero or a saint. He was just a man who fixed things across the ocean in Mogadishu. Abdi added something to the shop. He put up a small plaque above the door right next to the sign that said Chen Mechanics. The plaque had 2 words written on it in Somali and in English: build something. Every morning when the workers arrived, they would look up at that plaque and remember why they were there. Not just fixing engines and generators. They were building new lives. They were proving that broken things could be repaired. They were showing the world that even the most lost and damaged people could find their way back, and somewhere far away in a village in Myanmar, a quiet engineer would wake up each morning and get to work. He never saw the plaque or the shop or the young men who had built something beautiful from the wreckage of their lives, but he did not need to see. I knew it was. There he had planted the seed years ago in a concrete room in a pirate compound. Now it was growing into something he could never have imagined. That was enough. That was everything.